Jonathan McReynolds was never the loudest voice in the room, but somehow, his music always found a way to speak directly to people's hearts. Born and raised on the south side of Chicago, Jonathan grew up surrounded by the rhythm of church choirs, the sound of gospel records, and the warmth of a close-knit community. His mother, a dedicated single parent, noticed early on that her son had a special connection to music and faith. She often said that Jonathan didn't just sing to perform, he sang to feel, to express, and to heal. As a teenager, Jonathan didn't chase fame or popularity. Instead, he quietly developed his craft, writing songs in his bedroom and performing at small gatherings. His voice was pure, full of emotion, and carried a kind of sincerity that's hard to find. It wasn't long before someone uploaded a video of one of his performances online, and slowly, it started to gain attention. What started as a whisper turned into a growing echo. People weren't just listening to his voice, they were connecting with his message. His debut album, Life Music, was like a journal set to melody. It told real stories, raw emotions, and the kind of faith that didn't pretend to be perfect. That honesty struck a chord, and Jonathan quickly became a name to know in the gospel world. Over the years, he would go on to earn Grammy nominations, Dove Awards, and respect from artists across genres. Yet through it all, he remained grounded, always pointing people back to God, never to himself. But Jonathan's music wasn't just for Sunday mornings. It was for quiet nights of questioning, for long drives filled with tears, and for those moments when faith felt like the only thing left to hold on to. He became the voice of a generation that didn't want polished answers. They wanted truth, even if it came wrapped in pain. With each new song, Jonathan opened a little more of his heart. He sang about loneliness, doubt, forgiveness, and hope. And in doing so, he became more than just a gospel artist. He became a companion to many, reminding them that even in the darkness, light was still possible. But while the world saw a man rising, few noticed the quiet storms that were beginning to build inside him. Part 2. Signs of Struggle. In the middle of his growing success, subtle changes began to appear. Fans noticed that Jonathan had started canceling a few of his shows, which was unlike him. His social media became less frequent, and when he did post, his words seemed heavier than before. He wasn't sharing updates about new songs or tour dates. Instead, he was sharing quotes about peace, exhaustion, and finding strength in weakness. Many dismissed it as regular stress or just a break from the spotlight, but those who had followed him closely could sense something deeper. Jonathan wasn't just tired from touring. He was wrestling with something far more personal. Even in interviews, his usual bright energy was replaced by a quiet seriousness. He spoke about the importance of mental health and the need to take care of the soul before the stage. A few close friends, though unnamed, began hinting that Jonathan had been going through a private storm. He was showing signs of emotional burnout, and the weight of being a public figure who carried the spiritual hopes of thousands was beginning to wear on him. The very songs that had comforted so many were now asking more from him than he could give. Still, he tried to push forward, not wanting to let anyone down. He kept saying yes to performances and church events, even when he clearly needed rest. The light that once shone so brightly in his eyes was starting to flicker. Jonathan's silence, once rare, had now become a regular part of his presence, and behind that silence, something heartbreaking was slowly unfolding. Part 3. The unexpected. Then came the moment no one expected. On a quiet Sunday evening, Jonathan posted a heartfelt letter on his official page. The post was simple, written in his usual honest tone, but it shook the gospel community deeply. In it, Jonathan revealed that he would be stepping away from music, not forever, but for a season he couldn't define. He explained that for years he had poured everything he had into his music, trying to stay strong for everyone else. But now, he needed to heal. He admitted that he had been battling waves of anxiety and emotional exhaustion, things he never thought he would face at this level in his life. His letter didn't blame anyone, and it wasn't bitter. In fact, It was filled with gratitude for his fans, his team, his family, and for God's grace in sustaining him thus far. But it was also clear that Jonathan had reached a breaking point. The news spread quickly. Fans, fellow artists, and churches began sharing the letter with messages of support and prayers. Some were shocked, others were moved to tears. For many, Jonathan had been their musical lifeline in dark seasons. Now they realized he had been quietly fighting his own battles all along. In the days that followed, messages poured in from around the world. People didn't just miss the artist, they ached for the man who had given them hope through his voice. The gospel industry felt the pause. One of its brightest lights had dimmed, not in defeat, but in the brave decision to heal. Jonathan didn't offer a return date. He didn't promise a comeback album. All he asked for was prayer and understanding. And in that vulnerable moment, he showed once again why people loved him, not just for his music, but for his heart. Part 4. Friends and family. Speak out. In the weeks that followed Jonathan's announcement, those closest to him began to share small pieces of his journey. Not to gossip or explain away his absence, but to offer support and encouragement. His longtime friend and fellow singer, who asked to remain unnamed, shared in an interview, "Jonathan has always been the one praying for everyone else. Now it's our turn to pray for him." His mother, who had always kept a low profile, broke her silence in a brief post. She wrote, "My son is resting. He's choosing peace over pressure, and that's something we should all respect." The message, though short, carried a powerful truth. Jonathan was finally doing what many artists never get the chance to do. He was pausing to protect his soul. Even some pastors who had hosted Jonathan at major events in the past took time during sermons to speak about the weight artists carry, especially those in the gospel world. One pastor said, "We expect them to pour out every Sunday, every night, every moment, but who is pouring back into them?" It was a necessary question, and it opened up larger conversations about mental health, rest and boundaries in ministry and music. Fellow gospel artists like Kirk Franklin, Tasha Cobbs Leonard, and Lickery expressed their support publicly. Each of them acknowledged that the journey of faith, fame, and music can be a heavy road. Lecrae even shared how he once took a similar break, encouraging fans to continue praying for Jonathan, not as a celebrity, but as a brother. The overwhelming love and support weren't just for show. It was a reflection of the impact Jonathan had made over the years. He wasn't just another voice in the choir. He had become a voice of honesty, faith, and vulnerability in a world that often demands perfection. And while Jonathan stayed mostly silent during this time, those around him helped fill the space with kindness, reminding the world that healing is holy work too. There was no scandal, no controversy, just a man choosing restoration. And in doing so, he unknowingly inspired a deeper kind of strength in others, the strength to pause, to rest, and to be human. The first few months after Jonathan's announcement were quiet, almost too quiet. He didn't post, and he didn't show up at events. For someone who had been such a consistent voice in the gospel community, his absence created a noticeable void. But in that silence, something sacred was happening behind the scenes. Jonathan had stepped away, not just from music, but from the public eye altogether. Close friends later shared that he had taken a small retreat to a wellness center in a remote area of the countryside. Surrounded by nature, with no performance schedules or deadlines, Jonathan began doing the hard work, the kind that isn't seen on stages or screens. He started therapy, met regularly with spiritual mentors, and began journaling again, not to create a new album, but to rediscover his own voice beyond the expectations of others. He walked trails, prayed in quiet chapels, and slept without setting alarms. Slowly, day by day, the noise of the world grew distant, and the soft whisper of peace began to return. Healing, he realized, wasn't a one-time decision. It was 1,000 small ones made in silence, in private, when no one else was watching. But this wasn't just emotional recovery. It was spiritual renewal. Jonathan had spent years encouraging others to trust God in the storms. Now it was his turn. There were nights he cried, days he doubted, but in the stillness, he began to sense God's presence in a deeper, quieter way. Not in the applause, not in the spotlight, but in the still waters. Friends who visited him during this time said he looked different, not weaker, but lighter, like someone who had finally let go of weights he'd been carrying for too long. One of them shared, he smiled more. He wasn't worried about what song came next. He was just present. This season of rest didn't erase the pain or make everything perfect, but it gave Jonathan something more valuable than applause. It gave him clarity. He began to write again, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. His journal was filling with thoughts, lyrics, and prayers, not yet songs, but seeds of something new. Not a comeback, not a strategy, just truth. Jonathan's healing wasn't about returning to who he used to be. It was about becoming someone stronger, someone freer, someone more whole. And even though he remained out of the spotlight, those closest to him believed that when, or if, he chose to share his voice again, it would carry a depth and authenticity far beyond anything he'd released before. Because sometimes, the most powerful testimony isn't the one shouted from a stage, it's the one whispered after the storm. Months passed, then a year. Jonathan remained largely out of the public eye, but every now and then, subtle signs hinted that healing was happening. A cryptic Instagram story showing a guitar and a notebook, a repost of a worship quote, a short video of a sunrise captioned, "Still here, still healing, still his." People began wondering, would he ever return to music? Would he step back on stage? The answer, it seemed, was slowly unfolding, not in a dramatic comeback, but in soft steps of reemergence. He was seen singing at a small church service, not as a featured guest, just as a brother in Christ. A few amateur videos captured him, with eyes closed, no microphone, harmonizing with the congregation. The voice was still there, but something was different. It wasn't striving anymore, it was surrender. Eventually, Jonathan broke his silence, not with a press release, but with a quiet video message. Sitting on his back porch wearing a hoodie and holding his guitar, he addressed his supporters. "I don't have a new album to promote. I don't have a tour to announce. I just wanted to say thank you for letting me rest, for praying for me when I didn't know how to pray for myself, and for reminding me that I'm loved not because I perform, but because I exist." He spoke about how God had met him in his lowest places, not with shame but with gentleness, how rest had taught him more about grace than any award show ever could, and how, when the time was right, he would sing again, not for applause, but from a healed heart. That video didn't go viral in the traditional sense. It didn't break the internet, but it broke through something deeper, the lie that worth is tied to work. In a world addicted to productivity, Jonathan had become a living testimony to the power of pausing. And then one day, without fanfare, he posted a new song. Not a studio single, just a raw acoustic track recorded on his phone. It was called Enough. The lyrics were simple. "I thought I had to be loved by you, but you whispered back, I already do." The internet wept. And quietly, they listened. Not just to the song, but to the healing inside it. Jonathan McReynolds may have taken a break from the stage, but he never stopped ministering. In fact, his time away might become the most impactful chapter of his journey. Because in choosing rest over routine, vulnerability over visibility, and healing over hustle, he gave permission to thousands of others to do the same. Church leaders began revisiting how they cared for their worship teams and ministry staff. Music labels began incorporating mental wellness plans into artists' contracts. Even fans re-examined their own lives, their pace, their pressure, their priorities. Jonathan's story reminded everyone that strength isn't just about pushing through. Sometimes it's found in knowing when to stop. His decision sparked conversations about burnout in ministry, about the dangerous expectation that faith must always look cheerful, and about the importance of acknowledging limits. And through it all, Jonathan remained deeply rooted in the one thing that had always held him together, his relationship with God. Not the platform, not the accolades, just Jesus. As more artists spoke openly about their struggles, Jonathan became a quiet pioneer of a new movement in gospel music, one that values authenticity over perfection, process over polish, and rest as worship. In the years to come, whether he chooses to return full-time or remain in this quieter rhythm, his legacy is already secured, not just in Grammys or streams, but in hearts healed by his courage to step away. He taught the world something that even his most eloquent songs couldn't capture. Sometimes the most powerful worship doesn't come with lights, lyrics, or melodies. Sometimes it comes in the quiet whisper, "I need to rest."